Hey everybody, Eddie Heinzelman. Remember that video I did last week about humidity and humidification? Well, I guess this is part 2. So if you recall in the last video I talked about typically as humidification levels drop and the temperature drops, your guitar gets a little dry. One of the things that happens is fret sprout, or the edges of the frets start to feel sharp because they're extended a little bit past the fingerboard. Means the fingerboard has shrunk a little bit, usually because it's dry. All we're going to do today is touch up the edges of the frets. That's the only thing this guitar needs. So I'm going to show you the whole thing because I've gotten through some of the steps, but one of the things I use these tiles. Again, remember from a previous episode, I buy these little marble tiles at Lowe's or a home improvement store, and then my cling spore sandpaper fits perfect to these tiles, and then I cut them to length. I can use them as flat sanding blocks for nuts and saddles. But one of the things I do is I'll use this, go up and down the fingerboard to sand and bevel the fret edges. Again, tape off the top of the guitar as well, but I'm just showing you what happens is that it covers several frets at once, and then I bevel it about 45 degrees ish. You know, you want to tape it off so you don't hurt the binding. You want to make sure that you've got it nice and clean. This is 220 grit sandpaper. You can use 320 or 300. You don't want a real rough, 180 grit. You want like a 200 grit is fine. A little finer is okay as well. Some people will use fret files. I don't like to use fret files when I'm doing this. It's a very small area and the fret file is pretty rough. I use fret files only when I'm trimming down after a refret, really. Or if there's some really stubborn or hard material that I need to sand down, or maybe spot level a fret or something, but I don't use fret files for this. I use sandpaper. Once you have the bevel and the majority of that fret kind of sanded back, I use a triangle file. This is a really small one. So it has a flat surface, it has two angled kind of V shapes, and then right at the bottom is no file. It's just smooth. And so the importance of that is, again, being very, very careful as you run this across your fingerboard. The smooth goes across the fingerboard in the binding, and you let the file teeth do the work. You don't press, you don't force it, you just lightly brush across each fret. Now some people are going to go, oh no, you didn't tape off your neck. I did tape off the neck before when I was doing that. I'm just demonstrating the stroke that you do very lightly. I have tried these. I bought a set of these. These fret guards or fingerboard guards. These work really good if your frets are tall enough. These frets are not tall enough, so when I put these on, they come with a little rubber band to hold it against the neck. It's a great design. These frets are not tall enough to stick up above these, so can't use them. At least not on this guitar. You just want to be really careful, very light touch, and go through that fret, take off those edges, because the fret is, you can imagine it being squared like this, and these edges are going to be sharp. So what you want to do is you want to round the edges of the fret, right? So some people will say take your file and go down and round, and that is true, but again, you want to be very careful. If you start going in this motion on your fingerboard, you're going to contact the binding, if there's binding, or the edge of the fingerboard. So you want to make sure that you come across real light, let the file do the work. Don't press, don't angle, let the file do the work. Then if the edges are still a little bit, you can taper a little bit more. So anyway, so that is the fret sprout on this resonator guitar. I'm going to wrap this up, and then we'll look at the next thing that came through. So the next thing that's on the bench today, after I got the fret sprout all taken care of, is this ESP Telecaster style guitar. Only thing with this is, I'll take a picture of it here so you can see it. A lot of times guitars will wear, the nuts will wear, and so the nut slot on this first string has worn down and needs to be built back up. The owner has put in a slip of paper. This was actually a fairly common thing to do. My friend Zach Childs has just done a video on this as well about his Tele setup, and he talks about how players would put pieces of paper inside their nut slots when they would wear down a little bit too far. This one is worn down enough. The string action is super low. So I'm going to double check this. Now, the guy who owns this doesn't want me to just replace the nut. Really, normally I would just do that. Just take the old nut out and put a new one in. He wants me to just fill the nut slot and, recut it. So I'm going to show you a trick on how to do something like that. Again, this is not a permanent fix normally. First thing we're going to do, though, is we're always going to measure. Measure, measure, measure. You know, the old adage, measure twice, cut once. You always take measurements before you touch anything. Lights and magnifiers, man, they're your friends. Yeah, this first string is on the fret. It's at 0. Normally we want 1/64 of an inch as your action at the nut on the, action at the first fret. I honestly think it does need a new nut, because even the 6th string, the nut is at 1/64. Usually that's 2/64. So 1/64 at the first string, 2/64. This is 0 to 1. The relief is okay. 1/100 of an inch, that's fine. The action isn't bad at the 12th fret. But the nut is definitely not right. Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to show you how to fill this. I'm going to fill this for this guy because that's what he said he wanted. Worst case is I call him up and say, hey man, you need a new nut, and then we replace the nut. And then that's no big deal. Trim your string ends. Ouch. Put some low-tack tape on it, thicker tape. Use a feeler gauge or my ruler here to feed the tape through there so it's a little easier. You don't want any glue getting anywhere we don't want it to be. Okay, so what we're going to do, have a small container that I put together of dust from a bone nut. Other people will use baking soda, but we're going to use this dust from a bone nut. So that's just from me sanding a nut and collecting it. I use the really thin super glue from Stumac. When you're using super glue, it is very important. You always have Q-tips handy, towel to wipe it off. I'm just going to take a really thin piece of sandpaper, high grit, and run it in this slot. If it's already too low, we want to make it nice and clean so this will stick. I need something a little finer, but I'm going to use this. I'm going to use this screwdriver for right now. And all I'm going to do, oops, see, I even spilled, is get some of that bone dust down in the slot. Look at that. Fills up the slot. So I'm going to hit it with 1 drop of super glue. Use the pipette end. Never squeeze a bottle of super glue. Just don't. Don't ever squeeze a bottle of super glue. Let it pour out. Let gravity do it. We're going to use 1 drop right on this nut slot. Come here. You can kind of watch. There you go. 1 tiny drop. Wipe off the excess. Let that sit. Another thing, be really careful with super glue, or what we call CA glue. I actually have a hole now. Well, it's a scar now, but earlier this year, opened my shop, I got a drop of super glue on the back of my hand, and it burned a hole straight into my skin. Now, I never thought that I was allergic or would have a reaction. I've used super glue before, but getting it on the back of my hand was really bad, and that took several weeks to heal up. So just be very, very careful when you work with CA or super glue. 10 is the thin super glue, and then I also use 20 from StuMac, which is the, I don't know what it's called. What's the 20? Medium. Thin and medium. You can also use, get Accelerator, which then, when you use super glue, it sets really quickly. But Accelerator will make it set instantly. Don't need that for this. I'm just going to hang out and let this go. And what I've noticed is this is pretty solid. But it's not filled all the way up. So we're going to do this one more time. It looks like it's about flush now. Q-tip, super glue. Again, don't squeeze. So now we're going to let that dry. Let's give it, I don't know, let's give it 10 minutes, 15 minutes, just because. Let's go get some coffee. I have an idea for a video, not for a tech video, but for a lesson video, guitar video. And I got to work on it, because I joke with people, but I'm not really joking, in that my concept of there are no wrong notes. I'm trying to put that video together. I'm just talking now. So then the next thing I use are these really cool, really good quality Chiku from Japan. They're really, really great files. You can see this picture here of what the nut slot looks like now after filling it, after it dried. Coming in, I don't really need to change the angle or anything else. I don't need to change the size. I just want to smooth it out a little bit. Sorry for the light in the way here. And here's where the fun begins. We tune this all back up, and then we start checking the action and see where it's at. This is 1/64 all the way across. So it's not how I would set it up, but it's also how he likes it. So this is going to work in the respect that now the first string, filling it in a little bit, It's just above 1/64, so I'm going to use this nut file again, and now I am going to bring it right back down to 1/64 of an inch. Slowly and just a little bit at a time, restring it, measure it. If it's still too high, repeat. So I'm going to give it, again, pardon the light, just that little bit. Tune it back up, measure it one more time. It is right there. The other thing you wanted me to check out was the pickup height. Of course, with the string being so low, it was even impossible to check. He's got this Seymour Duncan in the bridge, so it's a little hotter pickup. And now I can measure with this string where it's at. We are going 3/30 seconds on the bass side, right? And looking at 3/30 seconds on the treble side. Treble side is at 2/30 seconds. So I'm going to pull that back because he told me that this was hot to begin with. So okay, I think that does the trick. Let's see if you can guess what's wrong with this. Woo! Yeah. Yeah, enough of that. It sounds like we got a ground wire or something, some kind of grounding issue going on. So let's dig into this. We have to troubleshoot, you know, from the jack, bridge pickup, pots, tone and volume, and the toggle switch. Typically, you'd use your multimeter continuity to test all of the components, and all the components seem to test out okay. If you touch ground to one and then hot to another, yeah, there's continuity all along. So in that case, it doesn't really tell you a whole lot because it seems like it's okay. Take a look at this one more time. Now, take a real close look. The black is connected to ground, and then the yellow is connected to hot. They're backwards. If you look at the rest of the yellows in this, the yellow is what's being used to ground the back of the pot. When they wired up the switch, they just wired them up backwards. The confusing thing about guitar wiring is we're all used to red hot black ground, right? But that's not how most guitar pickups and wiring are color coordinated. There's always there's green and there's yellow and there's black and there's red and there's white. So you have to follow the diagram for what you're using. You have to follow the color scheme for what you're using. Then you have to look also at where these things are connected. Anything that's connected to the back of a pot is a ground. You're not going to connect your hot. Those have to be connected to the post. So once you switch those wires to the correct lug, no noise. So man, we've had a busy day in the shop. Worked on 3 guitars, had someone pick up another guitar, and that's a wrap. Again, I really appreciate your support. We'll see you on the other side of the holiday, and stay tuned for more videos.